After finding a legendary mask and passing on its powers to his newborn son, a man must flee from the god who created the relic, while learning to deal with the baby's powers. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, Son of the Mask, from 2005. On a rainy night, a mysterious man enters the museum, where the history of the Norse gods is being presented. The guide tells him about Loki, the god of mischief, who created a mask with magical powers. He explains to the visitors that the mask, which is in one of the display cases, will give whoever wears it the powers of Loki. Suddenly, the mysterious man unleashes his powers and reveals that he is the god of trickery himself. All the museum visitors flee and Loki takes the opportunity to get his mask, only to discover that it was only a replica. Enraged, he removes the guide's face and puts it back in the display case. Then the museum security guards show up to stop the criminal. However, Loki fires shots from his fingers. Luckily, the bullets don't hit the guards, but the god soon opens a hole in the ground through which they all fall. The next day, on the outskirts of town, Loki's real mask is carried down the river, until it is picked up by a dog. Minutes later, in a house nearby, the couple Tim and Tanya visit their friends to see their newborn son. After this visit, Tanya asks her fiancé when they are going to be parents, but he doesn't think the time is right yet. When they get home, his fiancé gets angry at Tim's answer, and he tries to make up with her. Just then, his dog, Otis, appears and brings the mask he found in the river. Unbeknown to Tim, Loki himself is looking for it, as his father, the god Odin, has ordered him to retrieve it before the mask causes trouble on Earth. Later, Tim is at work and meets his boss, Daniel Moss, a famous animator. He goes to see the old man to pitch him his idea for a new presentation, but fails to impress his boss. At the end of the day, Tim returns home and gives Tanya a present as an apology. Soon afterwards, he has to go to the Halloween party at work, but he doesn't have a costume. His fiancée then suggests the mask that Otis has found and, with no other choice, Tim decides to take it. When he arrives at the party, he tries it on and the mask sticks to his face. As a result, Tim is transformed into the mask, a being who possesses all the powers of his creator, the god Loki. He then arrives at the party in style, but soon realizes that the guests are very bored. Tim seizes the opportunity and uses his powers to go on stage and liven up the show. Thanks to this, everyone is impressed by him, especially his boss. After the party, Tim, still wearing the mask, goes home and enjoys the rest of the evening with Tanya. The next morning, at work, everyone tells Tim about his performance at the party, but he doesn't remember anything that happened. To his surprise, his boss calls him to present a new animation idea. He was inspired by Tim's performance at the Halloween party and invited him to work on the project. Extremely happy with this opportunity, he returns home and tells Tanya the news. However, his fiancée also has something to say and suspects that she is pregnant. The two confirm this with the doctor and suddenly Tanya starts to feel sick. The doctor lends her the garbage can so she can put it out, but soap bubbles come out of her mouth. Despite this unusual event, the couple continue with their routine until the day finally arrives for the birth of their son, Alvie. Meanwhile, Loki searches for his mask in a warehouse, at which point the cellar is controlled by Odin. Through it, the god warns his son that a child has been born with the powers of the mask. He orders Loki to find the boy and take the mask as soon as possible. The next day, Tim searches the house for the mask, believing that it might give him more inspiration for his work. Unbeknown to him, Otis has taken it to his new cottage outside, after losing his room to Alvie. Unable to find her anywhere, Tim goes to work, while Tanya looks after her son. She then inflates a balloon for Alvie to play with, at which point the baby begins to inflate his head too, revealing that he acquired the mask's powers when he was born. Before his mother realizes it, the boy is back to normal, but nearby, Otis, who is jealous that Alvie has taken over his old room, has seen everything. At the same time, Loki turns into a bee and searches the hospital for the boy who was born with his powers. He finds the receptionist and chases her away with his stinger. He then takes on the woman's form and accesses the list of babies born on the same date on her computer. As he sets out on his search, Tim suffers the hardships of being a father. He and his wife spend nights awake because of the baby's cries, and in one of them, Tim almost gives his son a light bulb instead of a bottle. Luckily, the boy manifests his powers so that his father wakes up, without him realizing it. However, the next morning, things take a turn for the worse when Tanya tells him she's going away for a week on business. This news leaves Tim desperate, as the TV station wants a presentation of his new cartoon for the same week. On the day of his fiancé's trip, Tim asks his boss to work from home because he needs to look after his son. The boss accepts and then, after Tanya leaves in the cab and says goodbye to them both, he resumes his work. The problem is that Alvie won't stop crying and his father tries his best to calm him down, but to no avail. The next day, Tim spends another sleepless night and his boss keeps asking him about his drawings. Hours later, Tanya calls to check on father and son. The baby is happy to hear her voice and says his first word, Mama. Tim is proud of his son and asks the boy to say Daddy, but Alvie doesn't obey. His father insists and the boy says Mommy again, but now in an adult voice, which frightens Tim. Meanwhile, Loki starts following the baby list and arrives at a woman's house. He disguises himself as a salesman and presents her with a new model of vacuum cleaner. The woman goes to inspect the product, only for Loki to activate the vacuum cleaner and she is sucked into it. Afterwards, the god of trickery takes the opportunity to inspect her son. However, when he looks closely, he is disappointed to see that he is just an ordinary boy who throws a doll in the man's face. Back at Tim's house, he tries his best to work, but Alvie won't let him. He then decides to put the boy in front of the TV to watch the Flintstones and Woody Woodpecker cartoons, even against Tanya's requests, and finally the boy calms down. So Tim goes back to work and asks Otis to look after Alvie. But instead, the dog goes back to his house and starts digging in search of Loki's mask, which he had hidden. When night falls, Tim falls asleep while his son continues to watch cartoons on television. Just then, Otis finally takes the mask and transforms. Meanwhile, Alvie continues to watch cartoons and one of them is about a man who finds a frog that sings and dances. Seeing the animal's talent, he takes a businessman to see it, but when they get there, the animal behaves like an ordinary frog. The cartoon ends with the man being taken to the mental institution. Alvie enjoys the cartoon and doesn't realize that Otis, dominated by the mask, is planning to get rid of the boy once and for all. The next morning, Tim continues to work, but none of his ideas are good enough for the presentation. Just then, Alvie starts imitating the drawing of the dancing frog in front of his father, who can't believe his eyes. In addition, the boy turns his face into Woodpecker's head and then starts running and jumping all over the room. Alvie then runs to the kitchen, followed by his father who calls the emergency services. He talks about the tricks his son is capable of, but as expected, the operator doesn't believe him and hangs up the phone. After that, Tim tries to think of how to deal with the situation, until he sees his neighbor and runs to her for help. He explains to the lady everything that happened, but she doesn't believe him either. Tim tries to prove that he's telling the truth and then asks the boy to start singing and dancing, just like he did before. However, just like the frog in the cartoon, Alvie doesn't show his skills in front of anyone and behaves like an ordinary baby. Disgruntled, Tim tries to push the boy to show what he can do, but the neighbor gets angry and tells him to get out of there. Minutes later, Tim returns home and tries to get his son to calm down, but the baby grabs him by the leg and starts slamming his father into the living room furniture. Just then, Otis appears from across the room and hands Alvie a rattle. However, the toy was actually dynamite, which was about to explode. But the boy soon realizes it's a bomb and, as well as blowing out the fuse, makes the sound of the explosion with his mouth and runs away. When he hears the noise, Otis thinks that the baby has gone for good this time and celebrates his victory. Just then, he receives a huge bone and starts biting it, without realizing that it was also a bomb, created by Alvie. The bone explodes, but thanks to the powers of the mask, the dog survives. Even with this defeat, Otis puts together an elaborate plan to pull the baby out by crane rope. At the end of the day, the dog enters the house to begin his evil plan. At the same moment, Tim sees Otis transformed and holding various weapons, which frightens him to the point of fainting. The dog doesn't mind and makes his way up to Alvie's room. He uses a plunger tied to a rope to climb up to the ceiling and, seeing that the baby is distracted, climbs down to his crib and attaches a hook to his apron. Finally, he prepares to activate the crane on the way, so that the hook will pull the baby out. However, just as he was about to turn it on, Alvie comes up behind him and puts the hook on the dog's collar. Otis activates the crane and is instantly pulled through the house. Seeing this, Tim tries to help him, but the dog gets stuck in a piano and is pulled up to the second floor. The rope continues to pull it and it ends up in the ventilation pipe and comes out the other side, towards the ceiling fan in the bedroom. The object comes loose and flies out of the house, but soon it's back in the bedroom with the dog. The mess isn't over yet and Otis is once again pulled up by the crane and falls into a dirty vat. He is then pulled into the birdhouse and finally into the washing machine, where he is crushed by the drying rollers. After his plan goes wrong, Otis, all smashed up, gives up on attacking Alvie. The baby then blows on the dog, which flies out of the window like a balloon and falls into the garden. Thanks to this, Otis gets rid of the mask and returns to normal, but the house is completely destroyed. Nevertheless, Tim continues his fatherly activities and goes to change Alvie's diaper. At the same moment, Loki appears in front of his house. The god disguises himself as a delivery man and brings a box to Tim, who leaves his baby with him while he goes to open the package. Loki takes the opportunity to inspect Alvie, but he also behaves like an ordinary baby. Because of this, he decides to leave, at the same time as Tim opens the package and out pops a huge boxing glove, which launches him away. After a few minutes unconscious, Tim regains consciousness and decides to take his son to a pediatrician. He takes the boy to the car and fears that the baby is possessed. At that moment, Alvie spins his head completely around and then pours green goo all over the car. Unbeknownst to both of them, Loki was still there, and on seeing the boy's powers, he discovers that he is the son of the mask. Minutes later, Tim arrives in town and runs towards the children's hospital. Loki follows soon after, but because he parked his car in a disabled parking space, a policeman runs after him. The god of mischief then knocks the guard out and pins his head to the concrete. He then appears in front of Tim and orders him to hand over his mask. Tim says he doesn't know where it is. So Loki threatens him and pulls out a huge axe. Just then, Odin takes over the body of a security guard and begins to punish his son for his failure. Thanks to this interference, Tim flees with his son into an alleyway. However, Loki manages to break free, and when he finally catches up with them, he summons a huge iron wall to block the passage. Loki gets angry and summons a huge suitcase. Inside is a gigantic grenade, which he throws at Tim and Alvie. Fortunately, the baby turns his arms into a shield and protects them both from the explosion. Tim is proud of his son, but Loki has no intention of giving up. He assumes his true form and then creates a gigantic fireball. Just as he's about to throw it, Odin suddenly takes over Tim's body and shoots electric rays through it, taking away Loki's divine powers. Afterwards, Alvie also uses his power to stretch out his arms and then smashes Loki with 2 garbage cans, after which he is thrown into the garbage can. The danger has passed, but soon afterwards, Tim receives a call from his boss, who tells him to go back to work to give his presentation. The man rushes back to the company with Alvie, and there he meets the TV producers. However, with nothing prepared to present, Tim is fired and taken away from the company. Later, Tim calls his wife and tells her what happened. Despite everything, he confesses that he's happy to have spent this time with Alvie. After the call, father and son spend a moment together, with Tim giving his baby a bath, and then they both fall asleep. However, during the night, Loki reappears in their house and invades the baby's room. Seeing him in his crib, Loki writes strange letters on the wall and invokes a spell to call his father Odin. He then explains that the boy is the son of the mask and asks for his powers back. His father accepts his request, but gives him an hour to recover the mask and undo all the mess. Loki then gains his powers back and begins his plan, but seconds later, the neighbor appears and calls for Tim. To get rid of the old woman, he turns her head into a giant nose. At that moment, Tim wakes up and looks for Alvie in the cradle, but when he sees the baby, his face is replaced by Loki's. The man is startled, and then he hears Tanya's voice. However, it was Loki in disguise, and so the god of mischief reveals why he is there. He orders Tim to find the mask and take it to the alley within the hour, otherwise he will never see his son again. After giving the warning, Loki takes the baby and escapes with it through the roof using dynamite. Seconds later, Tanya arrives home to find the whole place destroyed. Tim appears shortly afterwards and attacks his wife, thinking that she is Loki in disguise. However, when he realizes that it really was Tanya, he apologizes and explains the whole situation. Obviously, the woman doesn't believe him, but the nose-headed neighbor shows up soon after, and she realizes that Tim is telling the truth. The two then set off to find Otis, as he is the only one who knows where the mask is. While they're looking for the dog, Otis has put his mask back on and is having a romantic encounter with the dog. His owner finds him and convinces the dog to help him rescue Alvie. The dog agrees and then gets rid of the mask and gives it to Tim. Meanwhile, Loki is with Alvie in the alley, and the two begin to test their powers against each other. They play Wild West and have a gun duel. Loki fires his revolver first, only it's a fake, while Alvie's is real and he shoots the man. The god enjoys the joke, until moments later, Tim and Tanya arrive in the alley. The couple propose exchanging the mask for their son, and Loki agrees, but at the last second, he changes his mind and decides to stay with Alvie. Faced with this deception, Otis runs up to Loki and bites him, causing him to drop his mask in the air. Tim leaps towards it and puts it on, transforming himself into the mask. Seeing this, Loki drives off, but soon after, Tim uses his power to transform his vehicle into a more powerful one. He, Tanya and Otis set off at high speed to rescue Alvie and are about to catch up with Loki. But the god uses another one of his tricks and activates a lever on the car, which causes the road to rise up in the shape of huge waves. Even so, Tim manages to pass through them and continues to pursue the villain. Seeing that they're not going to give up, Loki stops off at a boxing stadium and challenges Tim to a fight. He accepts the challenge and the two start exchanging punches, as well as their magical powers. Thanks to his experience with magic, Loki manages to knock Tim down, but his opponent fights back and hits him with a suitcase. He then closes the suitcase and throws it into the sea. When the fight is over, Tim reunites with Tanya, who has found Alvie in a cell and manages to free him. Then they all run towards the exit, until at the same moment, a giant pencil, summoned by Loki, blocks the passage with a brick wall. Tim tries to attack the villain with various gambling weapons, but the god of trickery uses his pencil to turn them into flowers. Finally, Loki tries to attack Tim with the pencil, but he uses a sharpener to shred it completely. Even so, the pieces of the pencil come together, and from them, Loki reappears. Seeing that the fight won't end, the god proposes that the baby choose who he wants to be with. At this point, Loki tries to lure the boy away by playing games. Seeing this, Tim decides to do something different and takes off his mask and calls his son. He tells Alvie that thanks to the boy, he has become a better man and that he is proud to be his father. After hearing this, the boy calls Tim daddy for the first time and chooses his family over Loki. Despite this, the god of mischief doesn't accept defeat and summons a giant hammer to smash everyone. Tim then uses all his strength to protect his family and manages to lift the hammer. But Loki summons drills from the hammer's head to pierce his body. All seemed lost until Odin appeared in front of everyone and announced that Loki's time was up. He is about to punish his son for everything that has happened, but Tim asks him to forgive him, because that is a father's duty. Odin is moved by this attitude, so he forgives Loki and takes him back home. The two of them say goodbye to Tim and his family and take the mask away so that it won't cause any more trouble. The next day, Tim talks to his former boss and presents his idea for an animation, based on the experience he had with his son. The boss loves the idea, and together they produce the cartoon, which becomes a TV hit. On the opening night, Tim celebrates the success of the show with his family. Soon after, Tanya announces that she's pregnant again, which makes everyone very happy, especially Alvie. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.